All right. Well, looks like it's 10 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's off to a great start, and welcome to April's South Atlantic Third Thursday Web Forum. My name is Lori Barrow, and I'll be your friendly host today. In addition to your friendly host, I also serve as the Information Transfer Specialist and Forest Service Liaison to your Cooperative. I know most of you are familiar with the overall format of these calls, but for folks who may be joining us for the first time, as the name implies, on the third Thursday of each month, your Cooperative hosts a web forum that provides an opportunity to share information about what's going on within the Cooperative and how it's getting done. It also serves as a chance for folks to ask questions, provide input, and learn about what other folks are doing throughout the landscape. So, each forum has roughly the same agenda, consisting of a brief introduction of the presenter, followed by a 30 to 40-minute presentation. I typically have some slides up that let you know about the rough outline of the agenda, but we had some technical issues this morning, so we're just going to go ahead and keep Steve's presentation up. Otherwise, we might have to spend forever waiting for it to download again. So following Steve's presentation, there'll be a block of time set aside to ask any questions about his presentation, and the remaining time will include a few brief updates from your Cooperative, followed by an open discussion where anybody can ask any questions about what we're up to, what's going on, and how it's getting done. So before we get into the heart of the forum, a few logistics. It sounds pretty quiet, so I'm guessing most folks have muted themselves. However, I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone so that we don't get a lot of feedback. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now.
The conference is now in silent mode.
If you do have any questions throughout the presentation that you just can't wait to ask, please feel free to use the chat box. If you do feel like using the chat box, please remember to send them to everybody so that I can read them following the discussion. Then, of course, at any time during the open discussion session, all you need to do is *6 to unmute yourself. So on the line today from your Cooperative, we have myself, who I already introduced, Lori. We also have Coordinator Ken McDermott, Science Coordinator Rua Mordecai, Socioeconomic Adaptation Coordinator and National Park Service Liaison Janet Shakir, and GIS Guru Amy Keister, as well as Brad Pickens. That said, presenting today will be Steve Frank on his project exploring the importance of urban trees, effects of urban warming on tree health, and the implications of climate change for natural forests. So Steve, since your presentation is already up and running, I'm going to go ahead and let you take over. Just *6 yourself to get voice.
Okay. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, everybody, for spending the hour with us. I'll talk today about the research we're doing in association with the Southeast Climate Science Center. My co-PI or my collaborator on this is Rob Dunn, who's in the Department of Biology. I'm in the Department of Entomology at NC State. And of course, there's a lot of people involved who actually did the hard work, and I'll try and recognize them as their work comes up. So just a couple of slides to introduce what we do in my lab. I have research and extension and outreach components to my job. And in our research, we work on ways we work on how urbanization and global change affect arthropod pests, tree health, and ecosystem services. And we also work on ways to manage those pests using a variety of habitat changes and other means. We have I have an extension component where I'm regularly giving talks to urban foresters and landscapers and other folks responsible for managing plant health. Write articles for industry magazines. We've got an app that helps landscapers make management decisions. And then outreach to the general public, we do quite a bit of that also, whether it's a science cafe down at the Museum of Natural Science here. We do the Bug Day, the Bug Fest at the museum, and other things. And then a lot of our outreach comes just from working on urban trees. Whenever you're out on a ladder with a magnifying glass inspecting tree branches, folks tend to either just look at you weird and keep walking, or stop and ask you what you're doing. And so we get a lot of public interaction that way also. And we've done this work in a number of cities that we'll talk about. But I want to start with the idea that arthropod pest abundance on trees has been recognized for over 100 years as being greater on urban trees than on trees in natural forests or rural forests. And the first account of this that I can find was from Davenport, Iowa. A scientist named Joseph Duncan recognized that this scale down in the, can you guys see my pointer? I don't know. But the scales down in the lower right there are called cottony maple scales. And he found that those cottony maple scales, which is a native insect, were so abundant on the urban trees in Davenport that they would weigh down the branches in some cases. When he went out in the countryside looking for this scale, he could never find it. And so he made this observation that these scales and other pests were more abundant in cities than urban areas. And so other folks have followed up on this. There's a recent review paper documenting that lots of plant pests are more abundant in urban natural areas. And so we still don't have good mechanisms as to why this is. And some folks have suggested natural enemies. Some folks have suggested plant stress. And so we've followed up on this using a couple of scale insect species so far to try and figure out a mechanism. And one of the scale insects that we use is called the Gloomy scale. And the Gloomy scale insects overall, I'll just give you a little introduction. You can see there's this tough, waxy cover, and then the insect is a soft-bodied little critter, looks like Jabba the Hutt, that just sits underneath of that cover and sucks out the plant juices, and they don't move. And so they just protect themselves with that cover and then hang out under there. They've got their mouth parts inserted into the tree. And so 100 years ago, an entomologist in our department named Z.P. Metcalf documented that Gloomy scale at that point, was the most important pest of shade trees in Raleigh and other urban areas. Since then, there's been no other work done on this critter, and it continues to be the most important pest. It's important because of how abundant and damaging it is. You can see on this branch in the picture how many scales are on that one tiny piece of branch. And if you imagine all those are sucking plant juices and that whole tree is covered to that extent, it can really debilitate the tree. The other reason it's so important is because it feeds on red maples primarily, and most of the trees that we plant in urban areas are red maples. And this isn't a very good tree to plant for a variety of reasons, but that seems to be what we do. The other insect that we've been working with, and this is Emily Meineke, she's done all the work you'll see on this on the oak tree system, and this is called oak lecanium scale. And you can see on this branch how abundant the ovisacs of this critter are. And most of the willow oaks that we see in urban areas are covered with lecanium scale. But again, when we go out to forests, we rarely see either of these insects. They're both native. So our hypothesis has been that temperature is a primary factor affecting pest abundance on trees. And whether it was in Davenport, Iowa 100 years ago or Times Square today, cities are hotter than rural areas. And so we can make connections looking at other research and where they found scales that support this hypothesis. And so we went out looking at it in Raleigh and other cities. The folks who have actually done this work, Adam Dale is a PhD student in my lab. Emily Meineke is a PhD student, co-advised by myself and Rob Dunn. And Elsa Youngstead is a research associate in my lab. And so today we'll talk about how urban warming affects pest abundance and fitness. One of our goals in this project is to determine if urban warming can predict the effects of global warming, since cities have, for centuries, experienced warmer conditions that are predicted from climate change, and determine how warming and pests interact to affect tree health. Because our ultimate goal is to preserve the urban canopy and natural forest health. So here's our study area. This is Raleigh, North Carolina, a Landsat image of surface temperature. And you can see, just for comparison, the big red blob in the northwest of this map is the Raleigh RDU Airport, and right next to that is a state park, that big blue area. And so the temperature difference between those areas is about 10 degrees, and you can see how quickly you can move from very hot to very cool conditions. So we took advantage of these maps and we overlaid these maps, street tree maps, so that we could find trees in the hottest and coolest parts of Raleigh. And we looked at strictly urban trees so that we could compare the effects of temperature without complicating effects of habitat. And so that's what this looks like. All the green dots are willow oaks. You can see that we plant a lot of willow oaks in Raleigh. And you can see how we could select a willow oak in a dark red spot and less than a quarter mile away find one that was in a cooler, or a dark red spot and a cooler blue spot. And so we can make paired comparisons that way. We've begun work in other cities: Boston, New York, Raleigh, and Baltimore. But today I'll focus on Raleigh data. And so we've found that overall, urban warming does increase scale insect fitness and abundance in cities. And there's Emily pruning out some branches. And then, of course, the next step is to take these back to the lab and count and count and count all these tiny little critters. And so here's some of Emily's data. And these are 3 different life stages of the lecanium scale. The top is the adult, the second instar. The middle is the first instar, and the bottom is the ovisax. And any time of year that she counted these insects, and no matter what life stage, she found that the hot trees in the red bars had 10 or 12 times more scales than the cool trees in the blue bars. Here's some of Adam's red maple trees, and you can see he's got more habitat variation going from these parking lots to some residential yards. And what he found was that he also found that Gloomy scale abundance increased by 300 times in hot areas. But the interesting thing that Adam found that was new was that scales got bigger as temperature increased. You can see in the bottom graph there that as this is average yearly temperature increased over about 2.5 degrees, scale body size increased from about 1 millimeter to 1.3 millimeters, which is a pretty big change. And this was associated with, one of the great things that Adam did was figure out how to dissect scales and count their ovaries. And these Gloomy scales give live birth from these ovaries. And so what Adam found was that over the same temperature range on his trees, scales produced about 3 times more eggs. So from 10 eggs per female in the coolest sites up to about 30 eggs per female in the hottest sites. And so this is an extraordinary difference in and could contribute a lot to the differences in scale abundance that we see. And here's a picture. The bottom picture is a scale insect with the cover removed. And so you can see the cover there. And they're really fairly featureless. It's really just a sac that sucks plant juices and makes babies. So we're going to follow up on this to look at other pest taxa, try and figure out how general this response is, and whether pest taxonomy or evolutionary history or other features of pests can help predict their response to warming. We're looking at how warming affects interactions with predators and parasitoids by changing the phenology of some of these critters or the survival of some of the higher trophic levels, and whether scale populations are actually evolving to be suited to the warmer climates. And so next, we've got this hypothesis looking at cities as sentinels, or cities as predictors of climate change, canaries in the coal mine, if you will. And so we've approached this question in 2 ways, and I'll just give you a brief look at some of these data. My research associate, Elsa Youngstead, did this great project where she went all over the southeast to get herbarium specimens from all the herbaria in North Carolina and Georgia and South Carolina. And it turns out that even specimens that are 100 or 150 years old, you can still see the scale covers on the branches of those herbarium specimens. And so she was able to go back in time essentially and count scales on these herbarium specimens that were collected haphazardly for the leaves without regard to the insects. And then we've also, my collaborator Rob Dunn has these warming chambers out in Duke Forest, which is about 45 minutes from here. And so we've been able to look at the response of some of these scale insects and other herbivores in those chambers, and then relate these changes from natural forests to urban forests. Here's some of Elsa's data. I'll take a minute to explain this. The black line is a running 10-year average of temperature from 1930 to 1990. And so during these peaks in temperature, red bars, these are hot times, or hot periods, a greater proportion of the herbarium specimens had scale insects than during cool periods. And then Elsa went back, and these data aren't shown, but she went back to some of these sites this year and recorded scale insects, and all of the sites had more scale this year than they did when they were collected previously. And the temperature has gone up dramatically at these sites. And so we've got evidence now that these scales are changing in response to natural warming and cooling, and that response mimics the response in this figure of urban warming, except to a different extent. And so you can see the black dots here are urban sites, the blue dots are herbarium sites, and the shape of the response in this case is the same, but notice there's a left and right y-axis where the urban side, I apologize, the labels for this graph seem to have fallen off, but the left side is the urban scale abundance, where you're getting up into the 200 range scales per branch, and the right side is the herbarium specimens. And so in the natural forest, you're still getting more at higher temperatures, but not to the same magnitude. And then some preliminary data we've gotten from the Duke Forest chambers. These are some soft scales that Elsa and Emily collected off of urban trees and rural trees, and due to urban warming or warming in the natural forest, you see the same shape response in terms of scale abundance. So we've got some evidence that cities could be used to predict which pests will become more abundant in natural forests and become a conservation or economic concern, and which ones may not. And so we're interested now in whether cities can also predict pest range expansion in response to warming. And so, maybe we can start to predict outbreaks like the mountain pine beetle and things that tend to become more damaging as the climate warms. So finally, we're interested in tree health, and we've got a lot of work going in this area this year. But I'll give you a taste of what Adam has done. You can see in these pictures that dark gray tree in the top is crusted with gloomy scale. And so that's what one of our hot trees looks like. And the tree in the bottom picture has almost no scale and looks much healthier. And so what Adam has found is that he used a database of 8,000 trees from Raleigh and overlaid the locations of those trees with the thermal data, the thermal maps. And then he could relate tree condition. This database that we got from Raleigh had all the trees, all the street trees in Raleigh, and they were all rated by their condition as being poor, good, fair, or excellent. And so we were able this way to relate tree condition as rated by arborists to temperature. And what Adam found was that in the hottest locations, trees were much more likely to be in poor condition and less likely to be in excellent condition. And so we're following up on this with other tree species and other cities to, ideally, we'd like to identify which tree species do best in the hottest areas so that we can put together recommendations and help urban foresters select trees more appropriately. And so, generally cities are getting bigger and hotter as more people move to urban areas. And at the same time, urban forest canopy is declining for a number of reasons, including temperature, pests, storm damage. Young tree survival is very low. There's a lot of planting programs where people go out and plant 1,000 little saplings, and and that's great. The problem is that not many of those make it to a mature tree. And so we've got issues in preserving and increasing the urban canopy. The picture in the background is Queens, which is a much older city than the picture of Raleigh here in the foreground. But you can see the difference in tree canopy, where Queens is around 12% cover or less, and Raleigh is still around 50%. And so we've got an opportunity to look ahead and try and preserve those trees if we can understand the reasons that they die. In terms of natural forests, there's a lot of problems obviously going on in natural forests, from exotic species to climate change. But it seems that in many cases climate warming changes the physiology and behavior and other interactions of some of these native critters and makes them behave or damaging as the way exotic creatures would be. And in many cases they are. They move into new areas where they're attacking plants that have no evolutionary history with them. And so they're still native to the U.S., but they may not be native to the latitudes or altitudes that they move into. And so lots of folks helped out with this project. Again, funding from the USGS Southeast Climate Science Center, USDA AFRI program, NSF. Emily's funded on an EPA fellowship, and lots of collaborators in the cities and places we work. So thanks for listening. I'll be glad to take any questions.
All right, thanks, Steve, for that great presentation. We have some time now, as Steve indicated, to answer any questions or comments. All you need to do is press *6 if you have any questions, or feel free to type them directly into the chat box. And to just get things rolling, because I'm talking now, I had a quick question, Steve. Are there any trees or species that you're aware of that are less likely or susceptible to scales?
Well, so what we've found in surveying things so far is, so we're trying. There are some. Many of them are exotics, and so if you look at the non-native maples, like Norway maple, and the non-native sawtooth oaks, they have no scale insects. That brings up other conservation issues in terms of if they don't have any herbivores, they're not supporting biodiversity at higher trophic levels either. But in some cases, you really just need the services of shade, pollution reduction, and cooling, and those other services may be of secondary importance. But there's probably other native species out there as well, and so we're trying to survey which one of those may be best also.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for Steve?
Okay, well, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Just so folks know, I know one gentleman had a little trouble getting on, so these recordings, these presentations are being recorded now and will be available through our site, the southatlanticlcc.org. And if you'll stay with us, we have a few South Atlantic updates. But Steve, once again, I just want to say thanks for that great presentation. And we'll talk to you soon. I'm going to take back the power now and get our presentation back up.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Okay. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that, guys. So jumping back to a few South Atlantic updates, we've been running pretty full steam here at the Cooperative. So I know Ken had a few updates, and then following Ken, Rua hopefully can jump on and provide a little update about the indicator process. So *6 to unmute yourself, Ken.
Will do. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to give you just a quick rundown of we have an annual steering committee for your cooperative, so the 14 organizations that are represented on the steering committee get together face-to-face about March every year. We also have calls once a month, but this is our time in March to kind of see where we've come for the past year and set the strategic direction for the coming 12 to 18 months. And so we met on March 25th through 27th, and one of the key things on the docket for that meeting was to look at the progress with development of Blueprint version 1. So I'm just going to run down a few of the sort of the outcomes of that meeting. The first of which was that they basically said version 1's ready it's complete. We're not going to build any more into Blueprint version 1. It's complete and it's ready for testing and refinement. And when we say testing, we mean using it in some variety of situations to see how it can inform conservation decisions. And primarily the way they asked us to do that was by working with their organizations to see how the blueprint could inform some decisions that they were interested in looking at, and also the user team that Rua has been working with in the development of Blueprint version 1. The other thing that they were really impressed with and want to continue to see help bring more people to the table was that there was over 300 individuals and 85 organizations that helped really in the development of the blueprint from the time we started working on our natural resource indicators to the time that we delivered this version 1. The other thing that they asked us to do was to look at sort of some cross-state opportunities for using the blueprint to inform conservation decisions and action. And the one that they were most interested in is checking into, and we can't say a whole lot more about this now, but was related to the bobwhite quail conservation initiative that's within the Southeast, and seeing if we can't use the blueprint to help inform decisions related to that, or bring more people to the table to support the conservation action related to bobwhite quail conservation. The other thing is that this testing and using the blueprint and testing it in these variety of situations, we want to use that information to help inform how version 2 looks, but also in how we present version 1. So version 1 will continue to be available, and we think we can improve how usable it is through the interface through the Conservation Planning Atlas. So as we engage with a variety of stakeholders in testing the blueprint, we'll also inform how we can present that and make it a little bit more easy to access. The other key direction that they gave to the staff was to start working right away on version 2, and they really want version 2 to be more data-driven, a more quantitative approach related to the objectives we set as a cooperative for our natural and cultural resources, in other words, our natural and cultural resource indicators. But they don't want to leave behind the great work that was done over the past year to bring the expert knowledge to the table and the incredible value that has. So they're expecting us to develop a version 2 that'll be sort of a hybrid between the two approaches. The other thing that they're really looking for and really excited about is that seeing the blueprint being used as what they call the gold standard. And the gold standard, I guess, would be to think of it as that in as many situations as possible that people and organizations look to the blueprint and how it can inform conservation actions and decisions that they might be making in their organizations. Other kind of key highlights were that Mike Harris from Georgia DNR has moved from the vice chair to be the chair of the cooperative, and Beth Stice from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is now the vice chair. And we were really acknowledged the great support and leadership that Marshall Williams from DOD gave over the past year in a variety of ways in helping lead the cooperative and getting version 1 of the blueprint to the point that we did, which was a really great accomplishment for your cooperative with everybody's help out there and making that happen. So with that, I would say that our next webinar, maybe Lori's going to say this a little bit later, but I guess I'll step in and say it now too, is that the next webinar, we're going to spend a lot more time delving into what all this means in practical application. What is the work and what is the help we need from all of you within the broader community to help meet these sort of directions the steering committee has provided to us. So with that, I'll leave it open for some questions if there are any.
Again, if you have any questions, just feel free to star 6. Okay, we'll have a little bit of time at the end as well if something comes to you a little bit later. So, Rua, if you want to jump in and give a little snippet of information about where we're at in the indicator process.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give everyone a heads up to keep an eye out for this coming month, so the May newsletter. So there's going to be more information on the indicator revision process. So it's going to start basically the beginning. It's going to start in the beginning of next month and then move its way through December, where we're going to go through and basically look at what the modeling looks like so far for all these different indicators, and it'll also be a chance to go and basically revise, tweak, update our indicators for the year. So I would say keep your eyes out to the newsletter coming up next month, because that'll have all the details about how we're going to do it. So indicator revision starting next month.
Thanks, Rua. And as Ken mentioned, we are indeed, the South Atlantic staff will be hosting the next Third Thursday Web Forum, and the rough title that we worked out so far is Guiding Your Cooperative, What to Expect Over the Next 12 to 18 Months. We'll be discussing the South Atlantic's plan of action and what you can get a feel for month by month where we're headed. And as usual, we always want to make sure that folks know that they can get involved in the cooperative. In addition to contacting any one of us directly, we operate a highly active web page. If you're not already signed up, please feel free to do that. You'll get 2 monthly reminders, one monthly reminder, and then our monthly newsletter. We want to know your thoughts, ideas, research, and concerns, so please do feel free to engage either directly with your steering committee representative or with a staff member. And with that, I will open the floor for any additional questions that might have come to you over the past couple minutes before we sign off, and just remember to star 6 to unmute yourself. All righty. If there's no further questions, we'll go ahead and sign off a little bit early today. I hope everybody has a great remaining rest of the week and have a nice weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.